Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Sweet Rolls. I'm Chris, and for the first time I'm doing this on my own. Well, not completely on my own. I got a guest on the line with our first international guest, Idran. Would you like to say hello?
It's nice to be here.
Thank you. Or should I call you by your real name, or is Idran fine?
Idran's fine.
Idran's fine, okay. Idran is a strange internet presence that I've known for the last couple of, well, I would say I'd known you for about 10 years. Known you.
Right, yeah.
The question is, who's the good one and who's the bad one?
Maybe people will find out by the end of this episode.
Probably. So, Idran, you're a long-time fan of our show because I make you listen to our episodes.
I'm a fan besides that as well.
Oh, I'm honored. Thank you.
That's a motivation, but it's not the sole reason.
Oh, that's great to hear. You do provide some really insightful commentary usually after you've listened.
Well, thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you as one of our fans. But tell us about yourself, Idran. Who are you?
Well, I'm the first non-European here for one, which I'm a little bit honored that you chose me for this.
Of course.
I've been role-playing, I'd say about 15 years at this point, maybe a little bit less than that. Mostly nowadays online. I've done some live-action stuff, but nowadays I've kind of migrated mostly into the online role-playing arena, text-based stuff and chat and whatnot.
Yeah, it's easier.
A little bit of MMO that I've started up, and been interested to hear the stuff from Andre about that. By the way, just to give a little plug for previous episodes. If anyone's skipping around in your podcast here,
yeah. What's your MMO? What's your flavor?
Final Fantasy 14 is what I've been doing.
All right. You're playing Bard then, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Still doing that?
Well, the character's an archer.
Yeah, of course. So you're on Balmung too, right?
Yep, that's right.
That's really great. You should join me for the stream on Friday. Play along with me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been hoping to do that. Not sure if times will work out because the schedule's a little bit hard, transatlantic and all that, but definitely hoping to at least catch the recording afterwards.
Oh, yeah, I should probably mention this episode is actually going up 2 days after the stream, so you can watch it on the Twitch stream. I'm playing some Final Fantasy 14 and leveling a character up to level 70 from 1. But that's a little bit of a not really relevant to this podcast. Do go on and tell me about your role-playing experiences.
Well, I started out in 2nd edition AD&D. That's really where I kicked things off.
AD&D of all things. God.
Yep.
Yeah.
Started off pretty much just family at first. Me and my brothers did some of that. Branched out into some school stuff after that. And I think the online stuff, which is actually where the two of us met, started around 2003 or so, was when I first started with that.
That sounds about right. Oh, yeah, 2003, I was 17 years old. I'd already been 4 years on that forum then, by then. Jesus Christ. It was a long time ago. But yeah, we didn't really do much interaction at that point, right?
Not really. We chatted every now and then, but I think we might have done some stuff in the chat RPs that we had for the audience. What we used to do back then is we just had sort of a freeform channel that was open 24/7 whenever people wanted to pop in and do a scene or whatever.
Yeah, and for sake of reference, this was back during Trillion and AIM, correct?
Yep.
So that was a long time ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
But mostly been sticking in the D&D branch. From 2e, I went on to 3rd edition, 3.5, and Pathfinder is my main thing I play in nowadays. I've done a little bit of GURPS, a little bit of White Wolf with you. Let's see what else. PDQ is something I've been looking into more recently. It's a very
PDQ?
nice...
What was that?
Yep, it's the system that we're using in our game.
Right.
Very low mechanics one.
Of course.
Which... Anyone that's interested in low mechanic stuff, by the way, I'd recommend that they take a look at that. It's a really handy system if you just want to get the dice rolls out of the way and just focus on the story.
PDQ, what does that stand for?
I'm not sure what it officially stands for. I mean, obviously it's a reference to Pretty Damn Quick, but I don't know what the official acronym is for.
Right, yeah.
It was originally for Ninja Burger, kind of a goofy role-playing system that was around some years back, but it branched out from there into other systems, and now it's just sort of a generic system.
Okay. But you would, I think it's safe to say that you're a D&D kind of guy then. That's your main game. It's interesting
Yep, I'd say so.
because we do come from very different origins. Because I was a White Wolf World of Darkness person myself, and I always would mock and scorn the Dungeons and Dragons players for their role playing with emphasis on role. But the more I play with other people in White Wolf, the more I realized that it was more my group that wasn't using dice that much. I met some pretty horrendous World of Darkness players in my days.
Yeah, and really, I think it's really the game that matters more than the system. Obviously, there's going to be some influence from the system there, but you'll remember the game we were in that I ran for you for Pathfinder, where I think we had maybe 10 combat encounters over the course of 2.5 years.
I remember that being an issue because one of the players, our friend from Slovenia, was used to min-maxing, and he gave you advice on encounter creation, I believe.
Now and then,
yeah. Yeah, but that's it's interesting how that's evolved, and I do believe that forum role playing and online role playing in essence kind of makes it hard to role play combat encounters as it should be played, so to speak.
Yeah,
it would just take too long.
So it's a little bit of motivation to move away from that, but also just in general, I kind of prefer the narrative side of things more anyway. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have a combat now and then just to get some action, but really it's the character development and plot development stuff that mostly interests me.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you some more questions, but before we do that, I should actually point out that this podcast is going to be about Planescape, which will be in the title of the podcast, of course, but we haven't gotten there yet. Planescape being the second edition.
Second edition, yeah. 2.0's people refer to it as.
2.0's planar system, essentially, which got ported over to 3.5, and then... Is it in Pathfinder, or is that just house rolled?
No, Pathfinder went with its own, but there's a little bit of interesting stuff there that I can get into once I'm going over the history of things.
But essentially, Planescape is the planar system of Dungeons & Dragons, and it is also a very, very good computer role-playing game. Which I think anyone who's interested in story-based role-playing should definitely check that out.
Definitely,
yeah. But back to the most interesting topic, what is your worst role-playing experience?
I'll say it's kind of a hard question to answer because I've been pretty lucky for the most part. Never really ended up in a group with like a horrible player.
You have never had that guy in your group?
No, thankfully.
But
I think it'd be a little bit more abstract than that. I'd say in general, just any time you're in a game where it ends before the story gets a chance to really wrap up, it's always a little bit disappointing when you don't really get that closure at the end.
I see. Yeah, you do tend to go for the really long narrative, which is a good thing. Definitely. But with online role-playing, groups tend to be a little bit more finicky, in my experience.
And it's harder to keep people together over the long haul like that, especially when it's an online thing.
Yeah, time zones do tend to be very, very difficult for you as well. But what would you say is your best experience in role-playing? Strongest memory, or just, the best time you've had while role-playing?
That's another tough question, but I would say, honestly, it was the game that I ran while I was in grad school, Avenging Broadshire, the one that you were in, Chris.
Yeah.
It really came together perfectly. I mean, I think about 3/4 of the group had never really role-played heavily before. You had, obviously, Bailey did a little. Ambi was kind of half there with some online stuff, and otherwise there wasn't really a lot of experience there.
Okay.
It got to be pretty wide. Yeah. It got to be pretty wide in scope. It actually sort of evolved into this epic thing over time where it didn't really start out that way. I didn't really plan it that way, but it really seemed at the time like everything just went perfectly for that narrative.
Yeah, you're writing up a summary of that story. You're writing a story of it, aren't you?
Yep. I'm novelizing it.
Great.
I've been working on that for a while now. You've been helping me out with that a little bit. And at some point, I'm hoping to get it to the point where I can actually throw it up online somewhere.
I think the listeners have gotten to learn a lot about you and our relationship. You're here to talk about Planescape, or rather the Planes, I think. And first a question, were you excited when you saw the 5th edition is actually going back to something more similar to Planescape?
I honestly haven't been following much about Wizard stuff lately.
Oh yeah, you went to
the first I've heard about
Pathfinder,
that, so I will say yes.
Yeah, they actually went way back on it, because 4th edition was a very bad move in my opinion. They cut back on a lot of the planes, and they had sigil in it. That's the proper way to pronounce it. But they didn't really do much with it, which was a pity.
Yeah, that's kind of the pattern for what they've been doing with planar stuff ever since second edition. It's there, but they've never really delved deep into it outside of the occasional source book.
But back in second edition or 2.0, I don't think I ever actually played 2.0 at that time.
And interesting thing, the planes actually go back even further than that. They were actually one of the first pieces of lore that were put together for D&D. They date back to Dragon Magazine issue 8 back in 1977, where Gary Gygax first laid out the general cosmology of the system, which was in essence unchanged from then up until the end of 3.5.
Wow. That's before Stranger Things. So that's how old that is. Yeah. Wow. Gary Gygax, an interesting fellow. I'd imagine Modrons were probably one of the first things to sign then.
Not actually. Those didn't come about until the first edition Fiend Folio, I believe, in the early 80s.
Because they do feel very first edition.
They do, but the very original form are even stranger than the later ones. Originally, they were literally just polyhedra with faces and arms and legs. They weren't even machines or anything like that.
They're actually in
shapes.
They're in the Storyteller's Handbook for 5th edition, and they look very strange. They're very cartoony and round.
I'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah, they're actually pretty adorable, which is saying something considering Modrons. And what are Modrons, Idran?
Those are the inhabitants of the Plane of Law, Mechanus.
So they're plane of law. So there would be a plane of chaos then.
Yep, which is limbo. So there are, altogether, in the outer planes, there are 17. They're all alignment-based. 9 for the core alignments, and then there are 8 sort of in between the ring around. Those represent sort of the midway points between the 9 extremes.
Yeah, and Dungeons & Dragons uses the lawful, neutral, chaotic, together with good, neutral, and evil. That's the alignment system. But you outer planes, you said?
So let's go into that. So the way the cosmology in D&D works is it's divided into 2 parts. The outer planes, which are the planes of ethos, of ethics, essentially. Those sort of correspond to the traditional afterlife views, where you go here if you're a good person, you go here if you're a bad person, that sort of thing.
So that's where the god lives then? Gods?
Yep. Well, that's where most of the gods live. And then you've got the inner planes. Those are sort of the planes of matter. Those are the elemental planes, the energy planes, that sort of thing. And then you've got the material plane in the middle of those. It's sort of supposed to be the balance between those two.
I always pictured the material planes as being like little bubbles. Is that from second edition, how they describe them?
That is from Spelljammer, actually. That was the D&D in space setting, where you had a bunch of crystal spheres, each one of them representing different campaign worlds.
Its own world,
Some of them not.
That's
and then
very
in between
interesting.
that, you had the phlogiston, which was this based on the old theories of what causes fire. And they all sort of floated in there.
Because I was listening to the Adventure Zone, this D&D podcast lately, and the way he describes the planes is like there's a set of planes for every material realm, which I don't actually think is 5th edition. But in old Dungeons & Dragons, there was only one set of planes in existence.
There is one cosmology, and all the worlds were thought to enter in there. Some writers weren't as big of a fan of that. I know that Y.C. Hickman, the creator of Dragonlance, really didn't want to be part of that big meta setting. But for the most part, in second edition, it was considered an overarching thing.
But it's interesting, because if you want to create Dungeons & Dragons All-Stars, that would be a setting that would allow that. So you could get Elminster, and you could get some other character from a setting that I don't know of, because...
Let's say Mordenkainen. He's basically the Elminster of Greyhawk.
I have to reveal here, I have not read a single... Actually, I've read one novel about Drizzt, and I put it down in disgust. So
that's also Forgotten Realms, so that's not even a different world.
But speaking of the Drow, they have the god Lolth, right? Where does she reside? She's evil and lawful?
And she's from evil and chaotic. So you've got 2 different types of... let's back up a bit.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
this is
absolutely.
actually an interesting bit because it was actually Lost Realm that was the first elaboration of the planes beyond that cosmology, that vague framework.
I see.
They were first really fleshed out into an area where you would go and adventure in Module Q1 back in 1980, Queen of the Demon Web Pits, where part of it was traveling through the astral, which is where the first rules of actually traveling through a plane were set up, and going into the abyss, where her realm was. And the Abyss is the plane of chaotic evil. It was originally a plane of 666 layers. In second edition, that was changed to infinite layers because of the whole satanic scare situation. But Lolth is there, as well as the demon races, the Tanar'ri.
The demons are chaotic fiends, then.
Yep.
So
there are two types of fiends, the chaotic ones, the Tanar'ri, and the lawful ones, the devils, or the Beitsu. And, well, two mainly seen types of fiends. There are others as well. There's the neutral ones, the Yugoloth, and there's a few other races that don't really get as much attention outside of Planescape.
But these are the typical, the typical chaotic evil and lawful evil, demons, devils thing. But I'm gonna back up again, like take a page out of your book and say you mentioned the astral plane. That's not an element, and that's definitely not a some kind of ethos. What is the astral plane?
Well, I think I can actually help in getting a general overall look of how the cosmology works in general by actually quoting from that very first article. So the very first thing that was ever written about what the planes were. So I'm going to try and channel a little Gygax here when I'm reading this bit.
And I will...
For game purposes...
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Okay.
I'll just refrain from asking questions and let you do your thing for now, because I feel like I'm actually making this more confusing than it is.
All right. Not a problem. So let's go ahead.
Yeah.
For game purposes, the DM is to assume the existence of an infinite number of coexisting planes. The normal plane for human-type life forms is the prime material plane. A number of planes actually touch this one and are reached with relative ease. These planes are the negative and positive material planes, the elemental planes, air, earth, fire, water, the ethereal plane, which coexists in exactly the same space as the prime material plane, and the astral plane, which warps the dimension we know as length or distance. Typical higher planes are the seven heavens, the twin paradises, and Elysium. The plane of ultimate law is nirvana, while the plane of ultimate chaos, or entropy, is limbo. Typical lower planes are the nine hells, Hades' three glooms, and the 666 layers of the abyss. So you can already see there that there was definitely a move away from the blatantly religious iconography stuff.
Yeah, I mean, nirvana isn't used anymore, no. Either.
That was all a response to the Satanism scare of the late 80s, early 90s.
I mean, we had a vampire scare over here, actually, with the World of Darkness vampire. There's a vampire
think I remember
murder.
hearing about
that. It was completely unrelated, of course.
Yeah. Same thing for this side of things. This all came about because a person happened to get lost in some steam tunnels, and there's this huge outcry. There's because D&D warped his mind, and then that got picked up by the religious community as D&D being a force of Satanism, of corruption, of all that. And so, getting back a little bit into the development history, because of that whole thing, they kind of ignored the planes in between the end of first edition and the launch of Planescape. And the goal of Planescape was to bring back the planes, which a lot of fans had really wanted to get to, in a way that avoided that sort of Satanism scare. So that's why you see a lot of that sort of got removed. It's honestly a situation, I think, where sanitization increased the quality, because by taking it away from that blatant iconography, it let them flesh it out a lot more in ways that gave it more depth.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. And I mean, they still kept pretty much the archetypical demons anyway. The succubus, for example. It's a demon, right? Not a devil.
In third edition, a demon. For some reason, they made her a devil in fourth edition.
Oh yeah, well, fourth edition, just no. I don't know what was going on there. But it's interesting because the planes were home to so many things that affected the games. From gods to demons to... You said the negative and the positive plane, too. So the negative plane, would that be like death? Or where...
Sort of death, entropy, the end of life. That's where the source of undead energy comes from.
So the yin-yang of balance of energies, I guess.
Yep, and then the positive plane is where life came from. It's where life force emerges from.
And there was one unique... Was it the ethereal plane for every... material realm, or how? What did you
Sort
say?
of.
Yeah. God, there's so many
So
realms.
originally the idea was that the ethereal plane was sort of overlapping the prime material plane.
Okay.
So things like ghosts, that when they vanish, they go to the ethereal plane. When you phase out, and people that are fans of the Adventure Zone will know this one, that's where you go when you sort of stop existing in reality for a little bit, when you teleport or blink, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Later on, it and the astral plane became what were called transitory planes. So the ethereal is what links the prime together with the inner plane.
Yeah. So when you die, before you get sorted into where you're going, you go to the ethereal plane. Okay. I got you.
Well, you go to the astral plane.
Astral plane, okay.
Yep.
But ethereal is
the one that links the outer to the prime.
Okay. So ethereal is more like the magical plane where you teleport and things like that.
Yep.
Okay,
and the
I
astral
got
plane
it.
is sort of the plane of psychics, you could say, and it's the one that links all the planes of belief to the material realm.
Yeah. And the Moderns, you said, were the creatures of order, the creatures of law, and the opposite.
They were part of Mechanus, where the one that we originally mentioned is Nirvana was originally called, but they were the natives of there.
Okay. And that's the whole different podcast, just talking about their weird shapes and the hierarchical structure of the moderns.
Yep.
But the March of the Moderns is the adventure module that you were using for us, and it's still used. No, that was the model you used when we played, correct?
It was part of it. Yeah, it was definitely a big theme in some of what we did. It was one of the big Planescape arcs, sort of. It linked together a big part of... I don't want to say exactly the meta plot, because it wasn't as strong as a meta plot usually is in a setting, but it was definitely something that was underlying a lot of what was happening in the setting during publication.
Because there's essentially this big story going on in the setting, in the Planescape setting, as well as in the material planes and all that, and the players are a small part of it. Which I find interesting, that there's actually stuff going on in the world that isn't centered on the player characters. It's very... And that would be sort of a fresh take on Dungeons & Dragons in general, right? Like stepping away from the players and creating a world that's alive on its own, as it were.
And that's one of the really nice parts about Planescape, that it does give that sort of living feel.
What is it that connects all the planes? There's a middle ground, right?
Yep, the Outlands are it's the center of the 17 planes. It's one of the 17. It's the plane of neutrality. And the other outer planes run in what's called the Great Ring around that, going from lawful to lawful neutral with tendencies towards good to lawful good, and so on all around, transition to transition until you get back where you started. But it's all centered at the Outlands.
Yeah, so if you want to picture this, I suppose you can imagine it as Trivial Pursuit. Perhaps.
Yep.
That you have a circle with pie slices, right? And each slice is its own alignment, and the further away you get, the stronger the alignment is, because it's wider than it is in the middle, and then they kind of meld together. And in the middle, you said we had the spire, and on top of the spire is what?
The City of Sigil, which is sort of the hub of Planescape.
That's not how you pronounce it. You burk.
That's not how you pronounce it.
It's Sigil. It's Sigil.
Yep, and it's the hub city of the setting. It's sort of the center where everything happens, where you can get whatever you want. It's your Ankh-Morpork, it's your Waterdeep, it's your place to go where if you really want to get into adventure.
Yeah. And being in the center of all the planes, there's got to be a lot of denizens from these different planes living there, correct?
Yep. There's a lot of interactions that go on there. A lot of some diplomacy, some combat, of course, and it's all watched over by the figure known as the Lady of Pain, the enigmatic leader of Sigil, the one who rules it, controls it, and keeps the city from being destroyed and keeps the gods out.
So the gods are not allowed to be in Sigil. Nope. Oh, there we go.
I infected you.
Yeah. But the gods are not allowed to be there, just as they are limited from being in the material plane as well. I mean, they can manifest briefly in the material plane, but in Sigil they're actually banned.
Yeah, because the lady thinks they cause too much trouble.
But are their servants banned?
Nope, their servants can be there just fine. They can preach so long as they don't try to bring the gods in, and so long as they don't try to get too much power in the city.
So she's like a checks and balances, kind of making sure that everything's in order.
Yep, and the ones that essentially run the city practically, logistically, the factions are the ones that are sort of manifested in that checks and balances.
Yeah. Each one of them stands for a certain belief and ethos about the way that the multiverse really works, the truth behind what everything is. And they're very fervent about that belief. It drives everything they do, and their main goal is to convince others of the truth of that belief. For some examples, there's the Society of Sensation, who believe that the multiverse can only really be understood by experiencing it, that you have to go out and try things for yourself, both good and bad, and without that you'll never know how things really are. Or, say, the Fraternity of Order, who believe that to understand the multiverse, you have to understand the rules that underpin it. For more abstract, there's the Bleak Cabal, who are nihilists, essentially, who believe that there is no meaning to the multiverse, that you either have to find your own meaning or let that take you down. The factions are really one of the big things about Planescape. They were the fundamental idea that really got the original developer, Zeb Cook, to hook into what Planescape should be. They've been called philosophers with malice is the normal term for them. Each one of them stands for a certain type of belief, and they're really, really fervent about that belief.
I think that's what really made me keep playing Planescape Torment when I first got into it, because I was blown away by the fact that you had all these factions that you could learn more about, and you could actually, I think you could rise in rank as well, right?
Yep. I can't remember if you could in the game. I think you could. I know at one point they had mechanics for that. But I don't remember.
And it was just, it was amazing the fact that they were all these different life philosophies. Of course, I didn't get it when I actually played the game, but reading the books later, I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah. It really hammered in that the point of Planescape is supposed to be that belief matters. That what you believe is important.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a great backdrop for a game like Planescape Torment, which is so much, which is really about a concept rather than an adventure.
But getting back to the planes.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the Fiends, the Modrons, but each one of the 9 extremes of alignments has its own, what I call exemplar race. I can't remember if that's the official term.
I think that's suitable, if not the official one.
Yeah, so you've got the demons and devils, the Tanar'ri and the Beitzu. You've got the Yugalos, or also known as the demons, the neutral evil ones. Those are sort of the schemers, the ones that stay behind the scenes, puppeteering things.
If you've read Order of the Stick, they make a little cameo there, I think. Good comic, by the way. Just throwing reference.
Yeah, something else highly recommended.
Yeah.
So those are the evil ones. Then in the neutral area, we've talked about the Modrons. Opposite them, you've got the Slod, which are the exemplars of chaos. They're these giant frog creatures that really don't have much... There's not really a lot to them, unfortunately. They kind of fall into that, unfortunately, fishmulky area that a lot of chaotic stuff gets into.
I believe 4th edition...
There's a little bit of gem there that I think could be teased out.
I think 4th edition actually really nailed the Slod, because I think it described them as creatures that don't even like themselves, and that don't.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah. And then between them, you've got the Romani, and this is going to be a pattern for the neutral races. They're sort of the schemers from the neutral end. They want to make sure that things stay in balance, that no one faction gets too much power over the other, that law doesn't suddenly overwhelm everything and wipe out chaos, that evil or good doesn't suddenly get too much power and wipe out the other, because it's all necessary. Even evil, while there's obviously the worst of evil, there's a lot of bad there. I don't think I need to go into detail about, but at its essence, evil, the way it's presented in Planescape and the way it's presented in D&D, is sort of more self-interest.
I was just going to say that
outright immorality.
Yeah,
and you don't really want to have a universe where there's no self-interest whatsoever.
Can I just take a moment to say that this is interesting how this world came to be because of the built-in limitations of the morality system of Dungeons and Dragons, which we've discussed a lot of times on this podcast. The fact that you have 9 options to choose from, and back in these days, that actually mattered because some spells would only work on you if you were a certain alignment.
And earlier than that, it mattered even more. There were alignment languages in the really early versions where if you were lawful good, then you could speak the lawful good language, and anyone that was lawful good can understand it, but no other alignment could.
But I got to give them credit for the fact that they took the alignments and ran with it instead of trying to make something not, something wider, because this really cements, in my opinion, the alignment system is an important aspect of the setting.
Yeah, and that really ties into the fact that belief is so important, that what you believe matters as much, if not more, than what it is you do to achieve that belief, or what that belief drives you to do, that it matters what you think.
Yeah.
And one big theme of Planescape is that your alignment, it doesn't restrain you, it's a reflection of who you are, not something that dictates what you are.
I think at least since Planescape, it's always been stated that alignments is not a black and white matter, and that is more of a lean-to if you're not sure what to do. But still you will have people who read it as, oh, you're out of character because you didn't do X when you were supposed to do that. So.
And it's all thanks to Elric.
Yeah. Wait, Elric?
The Lawn Chaos stuff actually originally came, if I remember correctly, from Michael Moorcock's Elric series. That's where it originally got introduced into D&D, why Gygax threw it in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so that's the guy to blame.
Yep. So we've covered 6 of them, and then for the good ones, you've got, for the Lawfuls, you've got the Archons, which... not quite angels, but close to it in essence. They're the Celestials of law. On the Chaotic end, you've got the the Eladrin. I almost forgot the name for a minute. They're sort of the more Fae-like. They are literally muses. They're the ones that inspire people on the material plane to creative efforts and encourage individuality. They're the more interesting reflection of chaos, the Eladrin and the Tannery, I think.
In later editions of the game, you can actually play an Eladrin as they are the more Fae-like elves in 4th edition, for example.
Yep. Although I think the 4E ones, they aren't actually the planar versions.
Probably not,
They're like a version of them, and then there are still higher above them that are celestial. But as I was saying, the Eladrin and the Tannery are sort of the more interesting expression of chaos to me, because they're more focused on the individualism, the fighting against structure part of it, than just the crazy random insanity, do whatever you want stuff that just gets boring.
Well, I mean, there's I think we talked about chaotic before.
It came up on the last episode.
Oh yeah, it did. When character creation.
And between them, you've got sort of the peacekeepers between the two branches of Celestials. You've got the Gardenals. They're anthropomorphic animals, and they sort of
wait, hold on. They're what now? They're
anthropomorphic animals.
They're furries?
Yep.
Okay.
Now, you can't say there's not a long tradition of furries in mythology.
Okay, cool.
And that brings up another interesting aspect, that these factions, even the good ones, don't automatically get along. You don't have all the evil guys are going to work together because they're all evil.
No,
you don't have all the good guys are going to work together because they're all good.
They all have their ideal.
There's disagreement. Yep.
Yeah, because
and there have been some pretty big ones in the past.
Yeah, and you have the Blood War, for example, right?
Yep.
That's
probably the biggest example. That's the ongoing war between the devils and the demons. And out of game, it's sort of an excuse to explain why the devils and demons don't just take over everything. But in game, it's there because the devils and the demons both believe that their approach to evil is the correct approach.
Yeah, of course.
The devils think that law is the right way to go. The demons think that chaos is the right way to go. And both of them are constantly fighting over that fact, and have been for literally hundreds of thousands of years, if not longer. It's existed as long as any mortal race can remember.
So essentially what this is saying is that evil would be stronger than good if evil could unite. But the very nature of evil means that it will never unite, because they have it's about individualism. So that's an interesting what would you call it?
In fact, that was actually an explicit thing early on. There's a mention that at one point the Celestials decided to try and take advantage of the Blood War and wipe them all out while they were busy fighting. So they sent some forces into the lower planes, and the Fiends did actually interrupt their war for a bit, fought them off, slaughtered most of the invaders, and at that point the Celestials said, okay, let's just let them keep fighting it out, let them occupy themselves.
Okay. Interesting. But the Blood Wars served as a backdrop for Planescape Torment as well, right?
Yep.
Because it's
Yep.
not just the demons.
It's been a
and the
backdrop for a
devils.
lot of Planescape. Yep.
Because they
Yep, they're
also
the main
recruit.
fighters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep.
No. You go on. You go on. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a backdrop for a lot of things, and like you're mentioning in Torment, one of the big things they do is recruitment. They can't do everything on their own for various reasons. I mean, for one, they're fiends; they're pretty obvious.
Yeah,
People are going to notice them, so they need stealth forces. They need people that can sneak in, so they'll hire mercenaries for that, or they'll need additional forces in an area where they can't easily bring people to, so they'll recruit armies to take care of that. And even beyond that, there are other forces that do occasionally get involved in the fighting itself. The Modrons, for example, actually have the third largest army in the Blood War after the two Fiends.
I did not know that.
Yep. It's to keep the lawful side from spilling over into Mechanus, just to protect it. And every now and then to support the Beitzu when the Tanar'ri start to get a little bit too much of an advantage. Because the Modrons, even if it is lawful evil, it's still lawful. So they don't want to
they're
see
lawful
Chaos win any
beings
more than the Beitzu do.
first and foremost. Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting. But I mean, then you got organizations like the Solid Blades who also help out in the Blood War, for example, led by a very charming and very endearing beholder, if I'm correct.
I have no idea who you're talking
No,
about.
of
This
course
must
not.
be someone that doesn't really matter.
We're talking about my character that I'm playing currently, the reincarnated one half of a beholder. Reincarnated as a very
which
angry
is
little
an example
woman.
of the sort of thing you can run into in Planescape.
Yeah, Planescape really is huge.
Yep.
And one of the things that also appeals to me is that you can play literally anything in that setting. Did they introduce monster races as player characters, or was that earlier?
They did a little bit. I wouldn't say monster races exactly, but definitely one of the big things in Planescape was to go outside of the standard player races.
Yeah.
In Planescape, your standard races were human and half-elf, obviously, because those kind of still make sense even in a player setting.
Course, yeah.
But then you had the Beriar, which are basically centaurs except rams instead of horses. You had the Githzerai, which were a branch of the Githyanki Githzerai split that would be a whole podcast in itself, honestly. But they're essentially monks that are resident in limbo and find peace through chaos. And then you have rogue Modrons, which are Modrons that have broken from the pack because of a little bit of infection of chaos and come into their own as beings and are trying to figure out what to do now that they're not part of this massive hive mind.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
And those were the base character races.
There's a lot of options. Oh, not all of them though. Wasn't Tiefling invented for Planescape too?
Yeah? I'm forgetting about Tieflings. Thank you for reminding me. Those are mortals with some demon or devil blood, or fiend blood in general, that have some fiendish ancestry, and that sort of brought them into this state where they have some of that manifest for both good and for ill.
Yeah. So they are.
I mean, it gives them power, but it definitely gives them a lot of discrimination too.
And it's relevant because after 4th edition, Tiefling has actually been a base race. Even in 5th edition, it is as well. And it's surprisingly popular.
I think Tieflings are probably one of the biggest successes of Planescape overall.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Honestly, in terms of staying relevant.
Yeah, staying power. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, with everything that's Dungeons and Dragons, these are just suggestions for how you can play it. But I think any GM worth their salt should look into reading, especially the 2nd edition books for Planescape, because they are very creative. They're very beautifully illustrated. I don't recall the name of the guy who drew them.
Tony DiTerlizzi. He's the main artist for the setting, and he probably did as much as the writers to really define what Planescape was.
He went on to make a lot of art for Changeling as well, for World of Darkness, which is where I first saw him. He has a very interesting watercolor style, lots of swirls, very fascinating, very good art.
I'm actually lucky enough to own one of his original Planescape pieces.
You got it?
Yep, the original piece itself, the art that was used in the book.
Interesting. Cool. Where'd you get it?
I got it off eBay. He was actually selling some of his original art, so I figured I had to jump on that and take the opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. That's a piece of history.
Yep.
I'm a little bit jealous.
Yeah, I've got it in a frame. It's back home at the moment, but I'm hoping to actually bring it to my apartment next time I head back there.
Planescape essentially is, I'm very happy that they brought a lot of it back to 5th edition. And hopefully
And
there
we
will
haven't
be...
even touched on more than like 10%
Oh,
of it.
no. Hopefully there will be more content produced by Wizards of the Coast. I doubt it, unfortunately. I think Planescape is...
It's part of an era of D&D that's no longer really around. TSR back in the 80s and 90s was doing a ton for campaign settings to put it out as much as possible, and it was amazing, but it was also one of the reasons they went bankrupt.
Yeah, but I mean, it's obvious when you read the Storyteller's Handbook, for example, that or the GM's Handbook or whatever you want to call it, that they really are pushing for you to create your own world. They're giving a lot of advice for it, a lot of like advice for creating pantheons, and way less focus on their own settings, which is sad. But like you said, that old business practice probably didn't work that well.
One of the best anecdotes of how badly TSR was run was that they would do these box sets, which is literally a cardboard box filled with things. You probably, some of your people might have seen old ones in game stores. There's still stock out there. You might have seen some yourself, Chris. But they had such bad accounting practices that they would actually accidentally price those below cost because they didn't know how much it actually cost per unit to produce them.
Oh my god. That's painful to hear.
To leave things off, I was going to say that if people are interested in Planescape, there's really 3 things I recommend they look into, because all of the stuff is available as PDFs and Drive-Thru-RPG now. It's all been put up by Wizards.
Very good.
So I would say Uncaged Faces of Sigil, or Sigil.
Good.
And the Planewalker's Handbook, which is just an overall guide to the setting that goes into a little bit more detail than the campaign setting itself. It's a great perception from the viewpoint of someone that's actually adventuring in the setting of what it's like. Now I remember where I was blanking. Uncaged Faces of the Sigil is the NPC book. The Sigil guide is in the Cage.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
That's, similar titles, easy to get them mixed up.
But they do also offer a lot of information about, they give you a lot of NPCs, and they have some really interesting adventure seeds as well, those books, I recall. So very good reads. Unfortunately, it's 2.0 or 2.0, not the best game system.
Not a really good system, but there's a lot of lore that you can sort of pull away from the mechanics and just run with it.
And there's conversion shards out there if you want to convert anything.
But I've got a few on my website if I'm allowed to plug that.
Oh, absolutely. Plug ahead.
Team Aresh, it's the Planescape wiki that I've been running starting with Broadshire for, 5-7 years by now, somewhere around that range. It's sort of accidentally become one of the larger, if not the largest, Planescape wikis out there.
I think it is. I think if you Google Planescape lore, I'm pretty sure it's up there, like top 3 hits.
Yep. So that's Team Aresh at www.realmani.org/Team Aresh.
I'll put it in the description too, but check it out. Definitely worth it. And again, if you haven't played it, go get Planescape Torment. You can find it on Good Old Games and on Steam, I think. There's literally no excuse not to get it. I cannot think of any reason.
I will say this, the gameplay of Planescape Torment, pretty bad, but the story is definitely worth it. So if you have to sort of force your way past the gameplay, it's worth
just
the
cheat.
experience.
Just cheat.
Yeah.
The combat is completely irrelevant. I'd like to thank you very much for coming to our podcast, Idran, and hopefully we'll hear from you again.
I love that.
Yeah, it would be great. We might even make this a regular thing every time Toby's too busy. Idran is the household expert on all things Planescape, so if you have any questions, I'll make sure to forward them to him if you have anything you want to know. Or just check out his wiki. So anyway, I'll see you guys next week, but until then, keep rolling.
Keep rolling.
Thank you for listening to Swede Rolls. Your support means the world to us. The music you heard playing at the start and the end of this episode is Fireside Tales by Darren Curtis. The intent of this podcast is to discuss themes and issues in all manner of gaming, but primarily focused on the RPG genre. If you have any comments or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Pay us a visit at swederolls.com, where you can also learn about the people doing this podcast and more. For our Let's Play channel, check us out at youtube.com/Swede_Fighters. And until next time, keep rolling.